I can eat a little bit higher fat, protein, and I don't need as much carbs to perform well. Let me mess with a little bit of potentially carnivore, potentially keto. Let me get rid of carbs altogether and see what happens. Okay, not bad. Let me sprinkle in some carbs and see what happens. Boom, okay, gives me a boost. I feel like, I can use this 100 grams of carbs today and get a lot out of it. I don't need to eat 300, 400 grams. So then I started learning how to use carbohydrates as a supplement.
All right, Nsima, as long as I've known you, you've been jacked and lean. You've got a pretty unique diet. Let's just go hit it soup to nuts. Like, what does a day of eating look like for you?
After today's video, I put a link down below for LMNT electrolytes. They are not sweetened with erythritol. LMNT electrolytes are 1,000 milligrams sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium. But that link down below gets you a free sample variety pack with any purchase of LMNT electrolytes. So whether you purchase their sparkling, whether you purchase their stick packs, or whatever, you get a free sample variety pack, and that's exclusively using my link down below. That is drinklmnt.com/Thomas. Again, drinklmnt.com/Thomas. Really interesting stuff. They curb my appetite entirely, but I also have them in a fasted state, and I sip on them during my fasted workouts because I feel like I actually get replenished, but I also get my cravings satisfied. So that link is down below in the description.
See, I'm sorry, that's gonna be a hard question for me. So I'll start with this because days of eating look very different for me. I'm focused on performance. I'm focused on the way I feel when doing things like grappling, when training. So for me, I've learned how to tune in to what my body needs on any given day, okay? I didn't always used to be this way, by the way. When I was focused on, I'm sorry, I'm gonna ramble, guys, so this is gonna take a little bit to explain. But I got to this point because I was at a point focusing on bodybuilding and lifting where you get the idea that you need to be eating 4 or 5 meals a day for muscle protein synthesis to maintain muscle, to gain muscle. And I was also a grazer, meaning I'd snack on things, even when I wasn't truly hungry, but I just had the habit of snacking. And I also found it hard to be lean. Because you mentioned, like, for the time you've known me, you've always known me as being lean, but like, there was a time much earlier where if I wanted to be lean, I had to track my calories. Nothing wrong with tracking calories, but I had to be very deliberate. And it was difficult when I got to certain body fat levels to actually maintain that without trying, right? It wasn't until I started using some fasting back in late 2016, early 2017. And I started doing that not for diet, but more so for mental clarity. But what fasting taught me was to tune in to my body's signals of hunger truly. Because when you force yourself not to eat for 12 hours of the day, you come into this comfort of, oh, it's 10 a.m. and I usually eat, but you don't reach for food. And then you learn, I don't have to eat, right? And then I wasn't really hungry. I just usually eat at 10 a.m. or I usually eat at 9 a.m. So you build the habit of being like, oh, shoot, I can go until this time without eating. I watched one of your videos, by the way, when I started fasting. It was before we ever met, but I've made the mistake early on of fasting too long, eating too much, and then having some gut discomfort. That happened twice, and I was like, well, Thomas said you should eat a little bit lighter when you get off of fast, right? But doing that allowed me to understand that, okay, I can go X amount of hours. I don't need to be eating an excessive amount to be able to perform. So this will only be a few more minutes of this explainer because I need to give you this understanding so you guys can understand how I eat now. From that, I was also somebody that believed that if I want to perform well, doing glycolytic exercises like bodybuilding, jujitsu, etc., I come from the background of like high carbs. You're an athlete. You eat 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs a day. It's normal. You need it for performance. When I started using some fasting and I started going a little bit lower carb, I realized I can eat a little bit higher fat, protein, and I don't need as much carbs to perform well. Let me mess with a little bit of potentially carnivore, potentially keto. Let me get rid of carbs altogether and see what happens. Okay, not bad. Let me sprinkle in some carbs and see what happens. Boom, okay, gives me a boost. I feel like, I can use this 100 grams of carbs today and get a lot out of it. I don't need to eat 300, 400 grams. So then I started learning how to use carbohydrates as a supplement. Carbohydrates aren't bad. And I think within fitness, we have a tendency of wanting to say carnivore, keto, low carb, Mediterranean, plant-based. That's what you got to do, right? But when you start actually learning about a diet, not going carnivore because you're trying to lose weight or anything like that, but you're going carnivore to see what your body responds to, see how you perform, see how you feel. You go keto to, and I don't think I ever did legitimate keto, but like when I say keto, higher fat, protein, right? You see how you feel. You go lower carb and see how that affects your performance. You then learn how to do something like Mark Bell calls it becoming a diet ninja. We all call it now becoming a diet ninja because the way I eat, now I'm going to get to the point, is different on day to day. There will be some days where I'm like, I'm going to grapple today and I'm going to lift today. So the night before, I'm going to have some extra carbs because I know that I'm going to need to use those carbs tomorrow. Then there will be a day where I'm like, feeling pretty good today from yesterday. I know that tomorrow I'm going to have one grappling session. I know I probably don't need as many carbs. Maybe today will be a no carb or 50 grams of carbs type of day. Then there will be days where it's chill weekend. I want to give my digestion a break because I do feel it's important to give your digestion a break, to not be in points of time where you're eating all the time. And when I was younger, my mom used to make something called green juice, where it's like kale, apples, celery, aloe vera. Literally, she'd cut aloe vera out of the aloe vera plant and blend it in, all these different things. And my mom lives close to me, so I'll grab some green juice from her and I'll just drink a green juice for the day. And that's it. Because I know I don't have to do any crazy performance the next day. I want to give my digestion a break. I want to separate myself from the feeling of having to eat all the time. So when people ask me how I eat, the reason why I can eat this way is primarily because the first step was learning how to fast, learning how to separate myself from being dictated from my hunger. Because when I used to get hungry, I had to reach, I had to eat, I was frustrated. I would use my Ben and Jerry's as an emotional compensator. When I was feeling bad, I'd have a pint, right? But now I still have Ben and Jerry's, but the thing is I can actually eat 3 to 4 spoonfuls and put it away. For me, that was not a possibility in the past. There's no way in hell you could tell me I'd have 3 spoonfuls of Ben and Jerry's and be able to put it back in the freezer. I was not an adult enough to do that. But now, because of fasting, learning how to separate myself, it wasn't the caloric restriction of fasting. It was the habit change of separating myself from my emotional eating. And by separating myself from my emotional eating, that's why, as you mentioned, you've always seen me lean. I don't work to stay this lean. I don't feel like I'm dieting because it's not like I eat a bunch of different foods, but each day calls for a different type of eating depending on what's going to be happening on that day. And I know how to eat for what I'm going to be doing the next day, you know? So that's kind of the runabout way of that.
Yeah, it's like we have the water is so muddy all the time when we're just consistently eating that A, we don't listen to the signals, but B, we never really have an opportunity to know what works for us and what doesn't. Like it all just kind of blends together and feels the same. Like it's just, you're feeling 70% like dog most of the time. And, you know, and so it makes it, how do you ever know what to change or when to change if you don't eliminate variables in the first place? And I think that's where it gets difficult, the discussion of fasting, because you can certainly get into the granular detail and the science of it. But at the end of the day, I think what most people achieve when they do start fasting is just that level of emotional control and clear line of delineation between what is boredom hunger and what is real hunger.
What is dehydration? What do I need? Just some electrolytes. Yeah. Like, because I've found times, and fasting helped me figure that out, that like, oh, I'm feeling hungry. Okay, let me put some LMNT in the cup. I drink it. I'm not hungry anymore. That's crazy. So yeah. I was just dehydrated. We never have silence. We never have silence away from stuff going into our mouth all day long. And that's why the topic of frustration, or the topic that frustrates me about fasting, is that when it's always spoken about in comparison to caloric restriction. And this is the research of and I don't think this is, I'm not a science nerd. I don't think research is bad, but I think the lens of which we look at it through, it's like fasting versus caloric restriction doesn't make a difference with fat loss. I'm channeling my inner Lane Norton, and Lane's great, but at the same time, it's not always about the caloric restriction. It's how can we change people's habits when it comes to how they deal with food? Fasting gives us silence. One thing about me that I noticed in last year was that I wasn't a person that was comfortable in silence. I would always have music playing, or I would have videos playing, giving myself the excuse that I'm learning something. Or there would just be, when there was a bit of silence or something, I would grab my phone instinctively and be like, let me go look up something on Audible. And then over time, I realized that I was just uncomfortable letting myself think.
Yeah.
I was very uncomfortable with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, you know what? Let's force ourselves to start it off with just putting on binaural beats. You know, binaural beats?
Of course. Hell yeah.
Now, there's some science with it, which I haven't delved into, but I started finding that, okay, when I put on these hertz and I just sit there, my mind will start coming up with things. I'll start having thoughts that I haven't had in a long while, and I got to sit with those thoughts, and I got to let myself deal with those thoughts. Oh, new cool ideas are coming for things that I just haven't let myself think about. It's the same thing with food.
Yeah.
It's what fasting has done. Fasting teaches you to be comfortable with that hunger, and people, it's hard. It's hard for people. It's not so easy because, you know, there are all these different diets. There are all these different eating patterns. You want to do 12 hours, 16 hours. You want to eat 4 or 5 times a day. But I think that there is purely a power in silence when it comes to food. And for me, that doesn't only link to the fitness side of things and getting lean or trying to having more focus on fasting. For me, it was actually a cultural thing. And I never thought about this when I first started fasting. But my grandmother is a woman of God. She was a Christian. My mom also is a Christian, and they fasted and prayed. Within my culture, I'm Nigerian. My family's in Nigeria. I have family here too. But fasting and prayer is just a part of what we do, or what we have done. My grandma would go on water fast for weeks with just water, praying for her family, praying for her kids. And she'd be like, fast with me today. I'd be like, I want to eat, but I did. And I'd sneak in food here and there. But like, it got me kind of like used to it culturally, not in a diet, not nothing when it comes to diet, but just like fasting and prayer. It's not special to Nigerians and Christians either. People that follow the Quran fast. Asian countries and traditional Chinese medicine, they talk about, and I'm not some expert in TCM, but I'm getting into it because I like how holistic it is. But TCM has an idea that like you must have a break from digestion. The Bible talks about Jesus fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. There are all these historical references of the power of fasting, and not just the power that it'll have on you in terms of your hunger and your caloric restriction and getting lean and jacked, but more so the strength that it has on your mind and your spirit. And understanding that and seeing how powerful it was for the people in my family, I don't think it's actually an accident that my grandma lived to 100. I don't think it was even purely genetic. Yes, she was a small woman and small people live longer, but at the same time, she had these intrinsic habits that lend themselves to longevity. She fasted a lot. And she still ate, don't get me wrong, she was healthy. My grandma was walking around my mom's house at 85, 90 years old with dumbbells in her hands. Like she would walk around with these 10-pound dumbbells. We would go out and take walks in the sun. Like, and she wasn't doing it for health. She was just doing it because like, this is what you do. In Africa, she would walk around all the time, but fasting again was just part of the culture. So it doesn't surprise me that fasting has been such a powerful tool for me, not for getting jacked. This being able to stay lean easily was a byproduct of it, and it's a great benefit, but it's not what I was using it for. But the fact that now food is not anything I stress about. I used to track calories too. And I think tracking calories is good to put like an algorithm in your mind of how much food you should eat, give you an understanding of like, what's a cup of rice? What's 2 eggs? By tracking, you learn those things. But understanding that algorithm that I've built in the past, and now with fasting, I don't track anything at all. I just intrinsically understand what my body needs. I know my carbohydrates, like I mentioned, are a supplement for me. And I know when to use those carbohydrates, and I know when I don't need those carbohydrates. It's not a diet. It's like Mark calls it being a diet ninja. I can pull from plant-based carnivore, low carb. If I want to do 200 or 300 carbs, like high, I don't really do 300 often, but if I do that, that is high carb for me. I can pull from these things whenever I feel that I need it, but I actually know I need it. It's not coming from emotions. It's not coming from habit. It's not coming from hunger. It's coming from an intrinsic understanding of my body's signals because I've allowed it to be silent and understand what it needs.
Would you say you have that same sort of intuitive relationship with protein now too?
Yeah. Protein is amazing. Protein and fat are amazing. I eat quite a bit of red meat. I eat fish. I don't eat much chicken. But when it does come to protein, I will typically probably have maybe on average 210 to 220 grams. Some days more, because I can just kind of feel certain things. So I'm like, when I'm feeling unnecessarily hungry, I'll reach for protein first. But some days, this isn't often, but some days it'll be, like I mentioned, no food. Some days 170, 180. My weekly average is probably around 210, 220. But it's one of those things where I don't have to eat 250 grams a day to maintain muscle, which is a gram per pound for me. I'm 240 to 250, right? I don't have to eat that amount to maintain muscle. But protein is what I reach for because protein is satiating, and I eat in a way that sends my body the signals of not feeling hungry. So conceptually, I don't eat a lot of processed foods. I have Ben and Jerry's in my fridge. I have certain types of snacks.
Put it in the freezer, not the fridge.
Freezer. You're correct. It's in my freezer in the garage. There you go. Thank you. I have Ben and Jerry's in the freezer. But the thing is, I don't eat that often. And you know what's wild, dude? Okay. Again, I'm proud of myself. I have 6 pints of different Ben and Jerry's in my freezer. My favorite flavors, because I mean, you can't let them run out of dirt cake or gimme s'more or peanut butter s'more. Those are the best, okay? So I buy them in bulk, but I don't eat them every day. I would have never been able to do this, right? I would have not had the self-control. This would have not been a safe thing for me in 2016, 2017, 2018. But I've created enough distance for myself and these foods, I won't even call them foods, these abominations that I love. I've created enough distance between myself and these things that now I can actually introduce them, not every day, every now and then, in a reasonable amount. This isn't something that I would suggest to somebody who's starting out and doesn't have a good relationship with real food. Yeah. I'm not going to say you have to because I don't like absolutes, but I think it would be helpful for people to build a healthy relationship with real food, whole foods that send your body the signal to stop eating, right? Get the stuff that you're going to binge on out of the house. Get the cereal, get the snacks, get all these things that you tend to reach for when you're not feeling great emotionally, when you have an argument with your wife or husband, when you have a bad day. Get these things out of arm's reach so that when you have a bad day, because these days are going to happen, you reach for the thing that's going to actually be helpful for you. You reach for the thing that's going to actually help you feel full, which is going to help you tap into your true hunger signals, which is going to help your body understand that it's truly time to stop eating. Because I don't know about you, but I've had 4 sleeves of Oreos in a night before. Yeah. I've done it multiple times. I could probably still do it. And that's a lot of calories. That's probably, someone please comment the MyFitnessPal thing around that, but because it's probably like 2,500 calories, and I would still feel kind of hungry afterwards. But the thing is, it's never just Oreos, it's milk too, because you got to dip it. Yep. You got to put it in the milk, right? But that's ridiculous, right? How can you eat that many calories and not feel full afterwards? How can you eat that many calories and still feel like you need to eat? It's because, again, and this is where I think macro counting is great, but I think it's fallen short because the messaging is always there that you want to mainly eat whole foods, but then there's also the messaging that you want to fit 500 calories worth of trash in there, go ahead. But when a lot of people try to juggle this, and cool, you understand that you can and you can hit your daily caloric needs, and if you don't go over, then you won't gain fat. But the thing is, most people don't do well with that. Most people end up having more than they would like. They don't just have the scoop of peanut butter, they have 3 or 4, and then another one at night. Like it doesn't ever, most of the time, it doesn't ever end up being truly responsible. So for a time, it's probably in your best interest to create some distance between yourself and these foods, become closer to real foods, build some distance between yourself and eating all the time so that you can understand when you're hungry and you can learn how to reach for real foods when you're hungry. And maybe a few years later, when you become more responsible, you can then start to introduce some of the abominations in a reasonable fashion, where you can actually truly eat like an adult. Because I know years ago, I wasn't eating like an adult. I was making crap fit and not eating as much as the good stuff. And I was finding it hard to stay in shape. But now I don't even have to think about it.
I think what you're describing is the word that keeps coming to mind is stillness, right? Like none of us have true stillness, right? Like we fill our time with something. We fill our awareness with something because it's a distraction, but also it's part of our current sort of conditioning to always be busy. And that includes the things we do and the things that we eat. And even in Zen culture, you look at awareness is not the actual thing you're aware of, right? Awareness is the space you exist in and things come into your awareness, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, if you think of awareness, it's almost like what our definition of awareness is in the conscious sort of thought. You want to flip that around. That's what awareness is. Awareness. So with food, it's the same kind of thing. We're swimming in this world of constant consumption, constant triggering, constant just where you're not really able to ever have the stillness to take an objective look at like what you are eating. And even if you are making good choices or bad choices, it's really, really hard to A, physically feel it, but B, really truly take an objective look at what you're eating. You're swimming in it. It's the same conversation with your thoughts, right? It's the same. It's like if you were to take someone that has never, let's say, meditated before, and you ask them to meditate, they would probably start to have a panic attack, right? Because they're alone with their thoughts. They don't understand that a thought is just a thought. It's just a thought. It doesn't matter. It's the same kind of thing with hunger. Like hunger is just a cue. It's just, it doesn't really mean much. Like it doesn't mean much. And I know there's going to be people that say, well, hunger means everything. It doesn't. Like we are hardwired with the innate ability to know when we should eat. And it's just like, if you go for a long period of time meditating, okay, well, not everyone meditates. Not everyone would understand what that feels like, but someone that is taking time away from, okay, here's a better definition. Here's a better way to explain it. If people have kids, they'll really get this. You have loud kids in the house. All you want more than anything is just some quiet. Like you just want to get away and sit in your car where it's quiet because you've got kids yelling at you, screaming at you. You just can't think, right? So what is the one thing you're dying for? You're dying for stillness. Like you want to get out and you want to just have, and then you get 5 minutes away from your kids and you feel guilty, but that's a different situation. But then you just need that stillness. But most people don't go find the stillness. They continue to create more noise by scrolling their phone to distract or to eat to distract. But it's pretty obvious to see that like if you're in something loud and chaotic, all you want is to go be in the quiet.
Yeah.
The problem is that with food, we're doing the same thing to ourselves. We're constantly bombarding with food. And all our bodies are saying is, please give me stillness. Like, give me a quiet. Give me the quiet. Take a break. Problem is that food feels good.
Great. It feels amazing.
Yeah, it's like the stimulus to move away from the loud children is a lot easier than the stimulus to move away from delicious food.
Because why not just go find some stillness while snacking on some Oreos?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's funny to think about, like if you were to look at the brain, I don't have like any literature in front of me right now, but I could like reference a few things that I've seen in different cases, like fMRI studies of the brain when you're eating hyperpalatable food compared to fMRI studies, when people are overstimulated or meditating and things like that. Like similar things are happening in different regions of the brain. And I think like when we are bombarding our bodies with food and our brains with food, I mean, the amount of stimulus is just ridiculous, right? It's so you're just compare that to being in a loud room with a bunch of kids screaming at you. And it's, I don't know, I can't say with certainty, but it's probably like similar, like just bombardment of things. And when you put it in a sense like that, it's easy to comprehend that, okay, well, you need to get out of that environment. You're in a toxic environment. You're in a toxic relationship. You need a break. You need to go get some fresh air. But how come it's not okay to say that with food? How come it's not okay to just say, hey, take a break from consumption for a minute and let your body and your brain chill?
There's a few things. So an interesting thing from the first part of what you said was even trying to find stillness with food. It's potentially hard because it's even harder to hear your signals because we have a culture of eating while watching things. And when you're eating and your attention isn't actually on what you're eating or chewing or bringing it to mush and then swallowing, but it's on what you're watching, you're now enjoying this thing while you're entertaining yourself. And that gets in the way of you trying to be still and understand when your body's like full. You know what I mean? It's hard. It's not easy. I want to say this. It is not easy and it takes effort to have deliberate action and to have a level of awareness when it comes to how you're eating, what you're eating, how much you're eating, why you're eating, and to even have the want to step away from food and sit in the discomfort of being hungry. It's a lot. And I get why people find it difficult. And I'm not anyone who's going to say that that's an easy thing to do. But the thing is, it's probably going to benefit you in many different ways outside of just losing weight and getting leaner, etc. It's going to have a profound effect on your mind and how you respond to everything else. Because building the habit of fasting for me hasn't only allowed me to be more patient to my own signals, but it's allowed me to find different things that can help me emotionally, that can help my spirit outside of food. Because I think it's hard to assume that we always eat because we are physically hungry. That's not the case, because there are too many of us that are walking around with excess body fat and excess fat tissue that are feeling hungry. That's not hunger. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of things that processed foods have done to make it hard for you to tap into your signals of hunger, blah, blah, but there's also just a lack of options that each person personally has to deal with their emotions and their spiritual hunger, emotional hunger, etc. And what happens is when you feel those things and you feel that discomfort and you think that discomfort is that you're hungry, but that discomfort isn't your hunger, that it's something else. But you always reach for food, but you haven't built the habit of, let me go take a walk. Just go take a walk with this. Let me go sit with myself and think, right? I'm saying this because I've done this. like for me, when I was younger, walking was a joke. It's like, why am I going to walk? First off, I lift weights. Walking is going to make me be catabolic. Like, why walk? Why couldn't I just run? And of course, I didn't run either. But at the same time, it's like, why am I going to go take a walk? But it's taking a step away from food, becoming a little bit uncomfortable. You'll then have to learn different coping mechanisms. You'll then have to learn different habits to make yourself feel better. You'll have to go take a walk. You'll have to pick up a kettlebell, you'll have to just maybe sit and breathe, pay attention to your breathing, right? You'll figure out a bunch of other things that after you do them, make you realize I feel good and I'm not hungry and I don't need to reach for food and I have options. But the big thing is that many of us don't realize our other options because we're only using one or a few. It could be food, it could be porn. Like for me, there was a point where my option was porn when I was much younger. I was addicted to it. So it'd be food or just, right? But over time, you distance yourself from these things and you find healthier options that inherently, without you trying to lose weight, without you trying to get leaner, without you actually really putting in a lot of work for this, even though it takes some work, you get closer and closer and closer to the destination because everything in life is getting easier. You have more options.
I mean, you're legitimately creating space from every emotion involved with food. And the only way that you can drive that space and start that space is to physically create it. You have to drive a wedge in there and it has to suck for a little bit because you have to undo a lot of like tightly wound, right? And you've got to create that space. And when you create that space, then it allows you to really identify, I don't know, that almost all the emotions surrounding food, for lack of a better term, are somewhat irrelevant. Like, doesn't mean they're good or bad. They're just irrelevant, right? They're just like something tastes good. Okay, well, do I feel good eating this? Or like, is my body nourished? Or do I feel good eating this? Because you could feel good eating a plantain, you could feel good eating Oreos, or you could feel good eating a ribeye, or you could feel good drinking water. So like, create some space between the food and the emotion for a minute so that you can really, A, determine what it is you truly need, but B, more so, just create that distance. Because truthfully, if I am in a good headspace, I could probably get the same emotional satisfaction. And I could probably get the same emotional satisfaction from a chicken breast than I could an Oreo if I'm in the right headspace.
Okay. You know what? I'll give you that.
So like, how often am I in that headspace?
You sure about that, Thomas?
Not
chicken breast versus Oreo?
Too often, right?
Okay.
It's just like a matter of being able to kind of create that space, right? But it's like, I would say 9 times out of 10, I'd like say an Oreo is great, right? And the point is that like when you have accurately created that space, like when you are fasting and you fasted for a long period of time, and anyone that's fasted, you sort of come a little bit more in tune with what your body kind of needs. Like after a 48-hour fast, an Oreo sounds awful. It doesn't sound good to me.
Yeah.
After an 18-hour fast, it sounds nice. But once you go a little longer, then you're like, no, this isn't serving my higher self. This is not doing anything for me. Like, so it's like this biological, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, like wisdom comes in and says like, that is not going to serve you. Why on earth would I do that? You wouldn't go put your hand on a burning fire. You wouldn't go touch the hot stove. You wouldn't like cut your finger open with a knife consciously. It's like you become a little bit more aware of, a lot more aware of that stuff. And I think that is if there is ever a magic of fasting that people talk about, that's what the magic is. No one's denying that it's still caloric restriction. Like, no, sure, that's there. That's like, congratulations. Like, you did some basic kindergarten math. Like, good job. Like, are we still beating this drum and we can't like look a little further beyond that, right? And it's interesting that I had a guy on, I posted a reel on Instagram that was about like simple habits that I follow to stay lean. And it was pretty much just like, hey, I eat a really flexible diet, to be honest. Like, and the only thing I really do is just pay attention to timing and carb manipulation. It's very similar to you, extremely similar to you. And someone it was interesting. I would say they had the audacity to comment, but it's not like they were even trying to be, they were just like, imagine a life where you have to time your food. And I'm just like, imagine a life where you're counting every calorie. Like, you realize that like I had some Ben and Jerry's last night. You realize that I went to frozen yogurt with my kids. You realize that I had some gluten-free pizza. You realize that I probably ate more crap as far as frequency is concerned than most of the fitness bros. And all I had to do is manipulate my timing a little bit and have control. And it's just so funny because we are just conditioned to believe that it's just like, well, that's not what the RCTs say. That's not what, I mean, if we had enough RCTs, it would say it, right? But anyway, I digress.
Question for you real quick. Well, what are your thoughts on counting calories?
I've changed a lot on that. I haven't counted calories in a long time. I have a rough barometer in my mind of what a calorie is. So I
built the algorithm.
Yes. I feel like it's very important for someone that has like no understanding of it to know what's in a calorie, right? Like to know what a food contains. But I think that, we have this logical portion of our brain. We have, okay, let's take, for example, a baby that doesn't have a developed prefrontal cortex. Like, they're just going to stop eating when it's time to stop eating. They're just going to like stop drinking. I mean, okay, if you take a breastfeeding mother and you look at that, like they're going to feed until they're done feeding, right? It's just like, there's no prefrontal cortex overriding executive function developed enough to say like, okay, this is my sense of self. This is how much I need to consume to look a certain way. Like, as we get older and we put labels on ourselves, then we start like redefining what we need in the way of calories. And we convince ourselves that we're like smarter beings because we can do so. And I just find that to be complete. I think that calories clearly matter, but it's one arbitrary objective number in a giant world in the universe that we know jack about. So I think as a very, very basic means, that learning to count a calorie is probably a good thing because it teaches you basic energy balance. Yeah, for sure. But I think you cross a very fine line where it starts to become an encumbrance once you know the basics.
Yeah.
So once the basics are done, then if you're consistently counting, you're putting yourself in prison, in psychological prison. And I feel like it does more harm than good because with this over fixation on calories just makes us... you want to talk about the demonization of foods? That's where it all started. Like, so it's like on one hand, you have like extreme devout calorie people. And like, I'm sorry, but that is what got us fixated on food in the first place. Like the fact that we now look at a yogurt and say it has X calories rather than the nutritional content, or more importantly, how it makes us feel. So now we have an arbitrary objective number on something that kicks our prefrontal cortex into drive, and we start looking at it mathematically and not innately. So we start creating all these man-made problems around it, and we start developing limitations, and we limit ourselves because it's bad. So by that context, if something has 5,000 calories, is it bad? Like we talk about, oh, don't demonize foods. Don't call foods good or bad. So you're telling me if you give me 5,000 calories of something that is extremely nutritious and that my body wants, and I haven't eaten in 2 weeks, that's bad. Who put the label on what? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly what you're saying. I totally agree with you. And that's kind of the way I look at counting calories too, because it's an amazing tool for understanding, right? I haven't tracked calories since 2016. I haven't put food on a scale since then. And by the way, before that, when I was tracking calories, I always finding it difficult. When I did get lean, I couldn't stay lean. Why? Because with the way I was tracking calories, and I'm just going to speak for myself, I'm not going to say that anybody else does this, but my goal was to see how much crap can I maybe fit in to still hit my calories and still perform pretty well. So when you get lean doing that and you don't truly eat for what your body needs and you don't follow your signals and pay attention, but you're hitting the numbers, it's harder to stay at certain body compositions because it's a diet. It's you're tracking everything, right? But then, having that understanding, because like for you, well, I don't know if this is the only thing for you, but tracking calories gave me that algorithm of like egg this 50 calories, carbohydrates or this. I can kind of look at foods and be like, maybe around 200 to 300. Okay, right? That gave me an understanding so that when I stopped, I wasn't oblivious to the food I was eating, the fats, carbs, proteins. I wasn't oblivious. And I'm not even always thinking about that because I'm paying attention to my signals. But that helped me zone in to knowing how much I should eat. It gave me a base level understanding. And there was a point where I was like working with a lot of bodylifters and powerlifters, having them track their macros and stuff. And I would always tell my clients at that point, like, the goal of this right now is to do it so you can get to a point where you don't have to. Do it so you just have some understanding. But what most people end up wanting to do is they want to figure out how to fit the most sour gummy worms, fit the milkshake, fit the most ice cream while still hitting their protein, carbs, and fats. And at the end of the day, they're still feeling really hungry, even though they've hit their caloric goal, but they're still feeling really hungry because they weren't eating in a way that satiated them with whole foods. It's one of those things where it's like, it's not a bad thing to do. It's not a bad thing to understand. And it would be great if there was some nutritional teaching of kids. So maybe they'd have not in the caloric way or just tracking macros, but just so they can understand what's in food and what's, honestly, I'm going to call processed foods are not real foods. Yeah. I know that there's going to be people in nutrition science that are like, don't demonize processed foods. They're not foods, dog. Yeah. They're abominations. That is what I call them. I'll eat my abominations in very, very reasonable amounts, but they're abominations to what real food is. So I'm not going to ever cower down and call these things food, no matter what any type of nutrition scientist wants to say or mental health advocate in the space. Yeah. Because we have this tendency, and there is this tendency, to look at people like you that are fasting and creating some distance between themselves and abominations more towards whole foods and act like you have an eating disorder. I made a video that went viral on Instagram where I was like, I don't keep Oreos in the house because I don't think that I'm responsible enough to keep Oreos in the house. And currently I still don't, because I still don't think I'm responsible enough. That right there, Oreos for me is like, when I think about Oreos, my heart rate starts to go up a little bit. I start to get a little bit hot behind the back of my neck. Like, all these little things happen to me because Oreos, me and Oreos have a special relationship. So I know that when Oreos and me are around each other, I'm not going to have the most self-control. All right, I'm going to go at that thing. That's why I don't keep it in my house, right? And that was the premise of the video. The premise of the video was, if you know that there are foods that you do not have self-control around, get them out of your space, because the goal of your environment is to serve you. My home is set up in a way that benefits my health, my fitness, my mental health, my girlfriend's mental health and her well-being. We set things up in a way that make us feel that we can be our best selves. And if I have Oreos in my cabinet, I will not be my best self yet. Maybe 10 years down the road or something I could, but not right now. And I had so many warriors in the comments saying, this guy's got an eating disorder. How can this guy not eat? Wow, what? You haven't learned how to eat a few Oreos and put them away? You have an eating disorder, friend. You need to go get therapy. What? That's what they were saying to me. And there were so many people that held this idea. And I was just like, huh. I mean, I didn't mention I keep some Ben and Jerry's, but at the same time, it's like, because I don't choose to keep an abomination in my house that I personally know for myself isn't going to serve me, I have an eating disorder. I need to go see a therapist. It wasn't just one person either. It was alarming because it was so many people. And it was the people that you talk about, the people that we're speaking about right now, and no shade towards them, but it's like, why must I become comfortable with something we label food that is not food? Why do I need to become okay with this? We have such a big problem in the US because people want to think these things are food. They're not food. But if you want to have them, then you need to become a responsible adult and learn how to integrate it into your life so it doesn't take away from your health, which is what we've just spoken about, a process. You have your Froyo, you have your Ben and Jerry's, you have all these things. You've built an ability to have these as part of your life, and they don't take away from your health in any way, right? Whereas most people haven't done that because of the process of which they're going about trying to fit it in. You can, but maybe it's not by counting your calories and eating as much as you can so you can hit your calories and still hungry at the end of the day. Maybe create some distance, maybe get still for a while.
Do you think that, how much of a role do you think nutrient quality plays? Because I think it seems like a very basic question at first, but when you look at sort of from an appetite point of view and you get more granular, like, do you think that the body recognizes certain deficiencies and will upregulate hunger as a result? Do you think that, I'm just curious your take on it. It sounds like a simple, shallow question, but there's usually a lot of depth to it.
No, that's why it's about whole nutrient dense foods. That's why it's about that, because those foods, the micronutrients, those foods, not just the macronutrients, are going to send you the signals to stop eating. Whereas when you eat something empty that has a great amount of, like the Oreo has the perfect amount of carbohydrates and fat and no protein so that you can eat it and melts in your mouth and you can eat more and more and more and more. Calorically, you can eat so many of those and you can, like we just talked about this, you're going to still feel hungry. But try doing that with a ribeye or two. Try doing that with a ribeye and some veggies. Try seeing how much of that you can scarf down. Why? It's nutrient dense. You'll eat way less calories of this. It'll still be pleasurable. It'll still be great. But you definitely can't, it's going to be hard for you to engorge yourself like you can with processed foods. I think that's an obvious thing. And I think that's why the idea of tracking calories isn't horrible. It can be helpful, but it ends up being not as helpful to most people because of what you were just alluding to right there. We try to fit in abominations that aren't as nutrient dense into our diet. And because of that, we don't get these signals that we are satiated, we are good, we can go and do something else. We'll eat a lot of the crap, then we'll eat some or even a good amount of the good stuff, but we still end up having too much excess energy, right? Which I think it can impede your performance, because like if you're getting all these excess calories and you're someone who doesn't go do something, there's a difference. There's a big difference between, unfortunately, people that use their bodies a bit, and I don't think you need to be some fitness, like I don't think fitness has to be a big part of your life, but if you don't use your body much, if you're sedentary and then you're eating these excess calories from these abominations along with some food, and someone like a DK Metcalf who's mentioned that he eats bags of candy every day, but he's also an NFL running back that, maybe not a running back, I don't watch much football, but he sprints on a field all day long. He uses these calories. He uses this excess energy. I was listening to your episode with Bill Maeda, and Bill is wise because people were making comments about Bill and saying, oh, it's just Bill's genetics that allows him to eat that way. He doesn't even realize how genetically gifted he is. And it's like, do you guys realize what this man is actually telling you? Some of you don't realize it. Bill has become so in tune with his energy needs and his expenditure of said energy that when he's talking about feeling a ball of fire in his pit after eating like candy or any of these rich foods, he has developed a habit over years to eat energy and use that energy. Dude. That is a skill that you build over time. You don't just feel that. You don't just feel what Bill is feeling unless you don't go out and do something with that energy.
Dude, when he said that to me, it made me want to go burn every RCT I've ever read. I was just like, I'm so over it. You know, like it's just like, I'm like, I don't want to say that's the answer. There's no answers, but like, I'm like, this man gets it. Like he has spent, years as doing what he's doing, coming from samurai culture, like just like being as in tune as you can possibly be. And it's like we are trying with RCTs to consistently like just confirm our biases, which just come down to efficiency and kind of getting the human nature is to just find efficiency in everything. And efficiency is also going to mean, how can I allot for those Oreos in my life because that's what I want? And the path of least resistance is also having my Oreos because they make me feel good. That is the path of least resistance. So I think no matter which way we spin it, we can't gamify that enough. It's just going to, or it's going to be continue to be gamified so much that we're just going to continue to go down that path of finding excuses, finding excuses to not listen to our bodies. And it's going to happen subconsciously, unconsciously. It's going to happen just naturally because it's the easier thing to do. And it's the easier thing to prove, because if you can't see it, touch it, feel it, taste it, smell it, hear it, it doesn't exist, right? But you and I know that that's BS, because there is an internal barometer. There is something that tells us to stop. There is something that tells us to stop eating. There is something that tells us to eat more. But through the thousands and thousands and however many millions of years, we've lost touch with it, right? And it's like you get someone like Bill who's just like, what the hell is a calorie? Like, no, I've got my big bowl of rice. I've got my big bowl of chicken, and actually no, he doesn't eat chicken. He says chicken is a weak bird.
It is a weak bird. That's why you said chicken breast and Oreo.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Well, you also have a thing with Oreos, so that's
true.
But that, like, I related to that burning ball of fire that he talks about. And for those that, like, maybe we should cut to that clip for a second.
My thing is, when I eat large amounts of something that's good or not good, doesn't matter, I always consider that fuel. So whatever it is, whether it's Costco hot dogs or a perfectly done macrobiotic masterpiece, it enters my body in the context of it being a fuel. Like, literally, I just ate, a couple of pork chops with a bunch of white rice. And right now I feel that is burning. It doesn't sit there. It's not something that tasted good. I took in the amount of that is just right. I have a lot more there, and I might go into that later, but right now I took just the right amount. There's a lot of salt. There's a lot of cream of mushroom soup and white rice in there, but I'm burning that right now. I can feel, we had a little workout earlier. I can feel just, from what we did there, I'm replenishing myself. So,
but like, he essentially talks about, just you eat something and you feel it, and you feel it give you energy. And that is, when people ask me like how I quote unquote train or teach my kids to eat, I don't teach or train my kids to eat a certain way. I allow my kids to experience that fire. And when I've talked about this before, like when my kids eat something that is sugary, which doesn't happen often, I will ask them how they feel. And they say, I need to run. I feel like I need to sprint. I'm like, there's the answer. It's all good. It's not developing an eating disorder.
It's a supplement.
It's not an eating disorder to say, hey, you had carbs and you want to run. When you're talking to like a kid that says, you're literally asking them how they feel. And if they had, something sweet and they're just like, no, I have all this energy. Like, hey, when you're in tune with that, you should go run. Let's go run. Let's go run around the block. Let's go sprint. Okay. Like, I think being able to just teach that innate wisdom, or should I say, just have enough stillness to allow that innate wisdom, I think that's as close to the answer as I can think of right now. But
with that example of your kids, man, I think that is so great. But I can totally see the person commenting right now saying you're teaching your kids eating disorder habits. You're teaching them that they have to burn off calories that they eat. But you don't get it. If you're typing out that comment right now, you don't get what Thomas just said, because the abomination and sugary thing that kid just ate is not real food. You mentioned also that like we've lost touch over millions of years with this. We haven't necessarily lost touch, because Bill exists, you exist, I exist, your kids exist, meaning that there are many people that are doing this. We're not special, but there are many people who have learned how to get in tune with what their body's telling them and navigate this different culture. It's a different food culture that we have nowadays, with the amount of processed foods on shelves, etc. It's harder to navigate. But when you learn how to be in tune with what your body's telling you after you eat something, and it doesn't come from like an eating disorder, because there are people, I'm not going to deny this, there are people who will eat certain amounts of food and then they will go on the treadmill, not because they feel that they need to go run for the energy, but more from the context of, I got to burn this off. And then there are people that, like Bill, and I feel this too. And this is something that you do if you do things that are physical. I don't think you need to, again, I don't think you need to be working out as much as Bill, me, or you. But I think you do have to have something, some type of habit that moves the body, because I will feel the same thing. I will eat something, walk around, and then be like, okay, I want to go do some sprints. I'll feel that, not because I just ate something, but because I have this feeling of I want to use this excess energy. And I've sat with that enough that if I have that sugary thing, the sour worms, and then I sit down, I start to feel lazy and lethargic if I just sit with it, right? And that's why I know, like, God, this doesn't make me feel good if I eat this and I don't go take a walk. I don't have to go sprint after Ben and Jerry's. But if I have, like, okay, I mentioned 4 spoons, but if I have half a pint, I want to go walk afterwards.
What is that, half a pint, like 6 spoons?
7.5. Yeah. 7.5 to 8 spoons. If I have that, then I'm at least, I know I'm gonna go take a walk, because I can almost like just feel it moving. But if I go sit down, I'm then just gonna start to feel kind of lethargic, kind of hazy, right? My body understands what it should do to regulate these things, because I have a habit of movement. And this is why I think things are different when it comes to processed foods. If you want to learn how to navigate yourself with processed foods, because I still think that should be, it shouldn't be something you even have every day, in my opinion, but to each their own. Navigate it as healthy as you want. But if you're someone who wants to have these abominations in your palate, right, then you need to learn how to eat them responsibly. You can't just count them into your calories. I think these things function differently for people who are sedentary, who sit at desks all day and who don't move much, and have a caloric amount, but also eat a bit of processed foods. It's going to hit differently on them. It's not going to be like a Bill. It's not going to be like a you, where it's like we already have physical habits that allow us to exude and use this energy. If you have nothing that lets you use the energy, maybe you need to really be staying away from some of those foods. Because I couldn't imagine being sedentary and then also eating a lot of processed foods and snacks. I couldn't imagine that. That would feel horrible. And I've felt that before. That's why I would never do that.
No, it becomes purely cerebral at that point. Like there's a visceral feeling if you and I eat something that is a junk food. Like there's a visceral feeling where we have an energy surplus. We have to use it. It's not because we have a distorted relationship with it. And that can also be gamified. I don't know if you got to the part with Bill's interview where he talks about, he's like, sometimes I will go eat a croissant so that I feel the need to go burn it off. And he wasn't talking about it like, I feel super guilty because I had this croissant. He was saying like, sometimes like I just need that excess to trigger me to want to move harder. And it's like, that's what it should do. And that's like where these things, I guess, could have utility. I don't think they have a utility, but they have some leniency with them, and it's the difference. It's someone that is saying, yeah, like I eat this, like your body should command you to move. That's how you know things are functioning right. When there's an energy surplus, like we are a society that doesn't just exist. We build and grow and we conquer. And it's just what we've done in this, existence, experience, whatever you want to call it. Right. Mm-hmm. So when there is abundance, we should be growing and expanding. But for some reason, like with our current abundance, we're not. Like we become we're sedentary. So it's just, that's going to take distance. It comes back to that same thing of creating that space, gamifying it. And if you know, you know.
But it's, man, again, I feel for people because it's hard. Like it is truly hard. The environment that feels great, like a lot of social media, music, sound, YouTube, the amazing, freaking hyper palatable food that's around, and just all the things that can take our attention are so hard to get away from. It's hard. It's not an easy thing. So I feel for people, because when I see someone who's in that situation, I don't look at them and think you're lazy or whatever. It's just like I look at them and I'm just like, I wish you could just start taking those small steps to head in the right direction, because I think some of this is a learned behavior. Some people have had it since they were kids. Some people developed it as they got older. I developed a lot of these things as I got older, and I started trying things. So it's not like I was young and doing all these things, but it's also hard because when people hear the things you're saying right now, and when people hear the things that Bill was saying, they will immediately distance themselves from the idea with the difference being Bill's genetics, my genetics, your genetics. It's like, I don't disagree that genetics play a role in many things, but at the same time, it's like, are you listening to the habits? Are you listening to the ways that the palate actually changes so you start to enjoy whole foods when you distance yourself from processed foods? Because my palate was driven towards these things before, whereas now I don't. Even when I think about Oreos, don't get it twisted. I cool, but it's not as bad as when I was younger. My palate has changed to really, steak gives me that, right? Real food gives me that. Ooh, like actually good salmon. Like I feel that. Whereas in the past, that was just healthy food that I would eat, but the processed stuff is what I really wanted. That changed, right? Your palate changes, but you gotta take the steps. You gotta be comfortable in the discomfort. You gotta train yourself for these things because you can all build these habits. It's literally just the choices you make over a period of time.
Just because you have a thought doesn't mean that it needs to be true. And I feel like processed foods are like intrusive thoughts. And occasionally you will act on an intrusive thought. And Dr. Amen had said something once that it was just so powerful. And he's just like, we all have terrible, vile, horrible thoughts. It's what you do with those thoughts. You can recognize that thought as being, wow, like, did I really just think that? That's awful. Like, we all have intrusive thoughts, but do you go act on them? And in the world of like, if you identify foods as like being like thoughts that are constantly coming at us, it's an energy source, right? So it's like, you have this opportunity to like take this intrusive thought and put it in your body, or you have the opportunity to dismiss that, be like, that doesn't serve me.
Yeah.
And that's that, man. Well, where can everyone find you, brother?
Yeah, at the Power. I mean, if you want to listen to the podcast, you do Mark Bell's Power Project on YouTube and all those. But you can find me at Nsima Inyang on YouTube, Instagram, and then I also have a community called The Stronger Human.
Right on, brother. Thanks, my man.
Thank you, Thomas.